We've got another really fun junior developer happy hour this week. I'm excited to hear everything that Ben has to say. And in case you are new, JDHH is coming up in the next month or two on our year anniversary, which is pretty exciting. But we started this last year with all sorts of the hiring freezes and reduction in workforce going on. Both Sam and I recognize that it can be pretty tricky getting your first job in tech in the first place, and we just wanted to offer some support and prevent everybody we possibly could from giving up, because it's a cool industry to be in. And so how it works, it's just AMA, ask me anything, ask us anything. And Brian was awesome. I can see that he just posted the Slido that is, if you open up that link that says post and upvote questions here, that link is the best place to ask us questions, because we can, like I said, we can upvote. We can just make sure that we're getting to the questions that the most people are interested in hearing first. And then if there are other sorts of follow-up questions directly related to whatever we're saying, then the Zoom chat is a good place for that. Or if there are links that come up related to some of the resources that we talk about, then Zoom chat is for that as well. And then, as we were alluding to a couple minutes ago, if you're able to, and if you want to stay a little bit later after we finish up talking for like an hour and a half, then that's when we'll stop recording and invite people to come off mute, and we can have kind of a more normal-ish conversation, as normal as possible on Zoom. And we can kind of get to know each other a little bit better then. I think that's about all that I was going to say about the meetup. I am Brady, and I'm a full stack engineer at Nordstrom Trunk Club. I went to Dev Bootcamp in 2017 and have actually been working at Trunk Club ever since. We got fully absorbed into Nordstrom over the summer. So now it's been a lot of integration work, which has been fun and overwhelming, but fun. All right, that's enough about me. I'll let Sam say a few words and then we can hear from Ben.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Sam. I am a software engineer. I went to the bootcamp in 2013, so pretty early on. That's when I started my web development career, because I also got a computer science degree, but a long time ago. 2002, I graduated during the dot-com bust. Never ended up going into the industry. I gave up too quickly when I was looking for a job. So 11 years later, I found out about Dev Bootcamp, went to Dev Bootcamp and broke into the industry the second time. I focused mainly on front-end engineering for the past probably 5-6 years, most of my career. So I most recently worked at Lyft. I quit Lyft in December and moved to Tulsa. I joined the Tulsa Remote Program, which is a program where they pay remote workers to move to Tulsa and give Tulsa a chance. They want people to come check it out. So far, pretty good, despite a crazy storm that we had when I first got here, but now it's nice. It looks like it's 70 degrees outside right now. So hopefully I can go outside and ride bike after the meetup. But yeah, let's meet Ben. He's our special guest this week. Maybe give us an intro about yourself, basic intro. And also I'd like to hear specifically about the content you create as well for bootcamp grads. I've never seen it, so maybe if you could just tell us about that as well.
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Sam and Brady, for having me. My name is Ben Wilhelm, as it says in the lower left there. I am a self-taught software engineer from the days before boot camps. Somewhere around fall of 2008, I was tired of making my living in theater and TV production and started teaching myself software development. I didn't actually know that that's what I was teaching myself. I thought I was teaching myself web design. And it had been a hobby for me for a long time, just keeping my portfolio as a website, and decided I was going to start like taking freelance gigs as a web designer. And I'm a terrible designer. Turns out I was a terrible web designer, but I found that I was like constantly working, playing, learning about engineering and writing my own CMS to power all the web pages that all the websites that I was building, and ultimately found my way through and realized as soon as I figured out like, oh no, I want to be a software engineer. That's what I want to be. Everything kind of came together, and I had been at that point doing it and studying it long enough that I was actually good enough at it that I was able to find employment eventually. That was maybe 2011. So like it was a long road. I still was like doing software development and moonlighting as a theatrical technician, which is kind of a weird flip-flop of the usual the usual like day job side gig. So yeah, fast forward, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. In 2017, I was the associate director of web development for an agency called Dom and Tom. At the time, we were about 100 people in New York, LA, Chicago, London. Maybe we still had an office. I don't know. We had 4 or 5 offices, and I was exhausted. I was burnt out. Agency work is tiring. We weren't an ad agency. We were a software agency. We were a development engineering agency. Mostly building mobile apps, and I was building usually the backing services for them. And so I got a job teaching at Full Stack Academy, and that was just like if learning to code was transformative, was like the most transformative thing to my life up to that point, because I hadn't had kids yet. Learning to teach other people to learn to code is like exponentially more transformative. Like helping other people to get through that transition and find their place in this industry, and like find the power to transform their own lives and find the confidence to do things was unbelievably rewarding. So I was at Full Stack for about 2 years, and then I was doing some consulting. I was consulting with small startups because there are a lot of small startups that hire bootcamp grads, and you end up with teams of recent bootcamp grads who don't really know how to operate as part of a functioning engineering team. So I was consulting for startups who were in this situation, usually transiting from 2 to 3 engineers where they were just starting to get some traction, and getting into 4 and 5 and 6 engineers where now they need to actually communicate and have some structure to how they work. So I did that for a while, and then recently, last October, my friend and former colleague from Full Stack Academy convinced me to come work at Screencastify, which is we're an ed tech startup. We build screencasting software for K through 12 education, which you can imagine is very hot right now. I consulted with this company 2 years ago, and when I consulted with them, they were 8 people, I believe, and we are 60 now. That has happened in the last 8 months or so. So it's a very, very busy place to be. We're growing very quickly. It's exciting to be. It's where I thrive, honestly. It's like, drop me in. We've got a lot of problems to solve and a lot of unknowns, and let's get it done. So that's where I am. That's what I do for my day job, and I continue to make educational content for bootcamp grads specifically because, and I think Braidy posted a blurb about this in the meetup, but what I've seen from teaching and from working with bootcamp grads coming out of, during my consulting time, is that there's no way around the fact that you went from 0 to building full stack applications with very complex tools in several months. This is like, to give you an idea, like it took me 3 years to go from 0 to that point. And there's no, like, you can learn to use the tools, but there's no getting around the fact that a lot of the underlying structure, a lot of the underlying ideas and best practice and just general dot connecting there's just not enough time for it to happen yet. So a lot of the training materials that are out there are either for absolute beginners or for people who have maybe more foundational understanding, who have either like a CS degree or who have been working for a period of time, because this period where we are right now, where we have this giant influx of people who very quickly got up to speed on tools, but have not had a lot of long history in the industry. Like, it's a very particular time that we're in right now. And so there's most of the educational stuff that's out there hasn't quite caught up to it, I don't think. So that's what I do. At the moment, it consists of monthly webinars on topics that I feel very strongly that bootcamp grads should not focus on learning more technologies, plural, but more about the stack that they already know. Go deeper, fill in the gaps, fill in the underlying lower level technologies. Don't go learn a new framework. Don't go learn a new library. Unless you're working on a side project and it becomes necessary, like, yeah, go for it. But like, don't pack your resume to have terms on it. You will be a more, if I'm interviewing you, I'm going to be more impressed by your thorough understanding of the tools you have than superficial understanding of 27 different libraries. So I do things like debugging is the one I'm doing in a couple of weeks. Just a process for systematically approaching your code when you debug. Test-driven development. Just recently did one on Webpack. I'm starting to develop one on HTTP requests. What happens in between calling .fetch and writing your controller method? There's a lot that goes on, but you generally don't interact with it specifically unless something goes wrong. So that's where I am. I write these, I work on these specifically to meet bootcamp grads where they are. I feel like I have a fairly good understanding of the kinds of, like, the level of understanding and the tools that you've been exposed to, and trying to sort of fill those gaps and help you connect more dots. That was a lot longer intro than I thought I was going to give you.
It was great though. Thank you.
Oh, I just got on a roll there.
Someone's asking, where can they find these webinars?
benwilhelm.com currently. I also do a daily mailing list, which are generally lessons related to whichever webinar is coming up. But yes,
Thanks,
there
Brian.
it is. Thank you. I don't know. I should get on Twitter or something. I should do the social thing, but God, every time I get on Twitter, I look at it, I'm like, I don't want any part of this. So for now, find me at my website.
Cool.
It looks like the next one's on Wednesday, March 24th.
That's correct. Yep.
I'll put it in our Slack. We have an events channel in our Slack, so people don't forget.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so the idea is that right now, as these are happening, monthly, and then they're sort of gone, and but I'm hoping to then turn most of these, or at least the ones that people respond well to and are popular, into courses and a packaged, like, here's a short video and maybe an hour's worth of video content and emails, text lessons that are free or very cheap for bootcamp grads specifically. Because if you're out looking for a job, I don't want to be profiting off of you. I want to help you find a job. When you get a job, then I'll be profiting off of you. I'll sell you all kinds of stuff once you're gainfully employed.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recognize the same thing. A lot of my cohort was talking about exactly what you described when we were towards the end of our boot camp, that if we were ever looking up new resources to use and tutorials and stuff, everything was aimed towards either the beginner or someone who had a much better fundamental understanding of what was going on. And yeah, it's frustrating. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Happy to help.
See, you got a podcast too. How often do you do that?
We were posting every 2 weeks for a while, and then I make it with Colin, who I work with, but then everything got crazy at work and it's on a bit of a hiatus. We're actually talking about how to reboot it in a little different format. One of the things, I've not actually said this publicly yet, we've only talked about it in conversations, but one of the things that I think bootcamp grads are really lacking is you go through, 3 months of learning to build things from scratch, from the ground up, but you get very little practice dropping into a code base and understanding it, especially if it's not the stack that you have learned. And so we are thinking about doing a podcast where, I don't know, once a week, once a month, whenever we have time, the two of us just drop into some random open source code base and try and figure something out and get something done. So I don't know.
Nice.
I'll test this out on all of you. Does that sound interesting? Is that something you'd watch, Twitch or YouTube?
Yep.
I've thought about
Yeah.
doing the same thing. So yes, I think it's a great idea.
All right, fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it looks
Chat's
like
blowing up too.
everybody
Everyone
wants
loves it.
Somebody
right.
also
Noted.
mentioned that someone needs to invent a fundamentals bootcamp. That's what Dev Bootcamp was. I guess we did Ruby on Rails, but like for front end, they never taught us any frameworks. They
What do you
stuck
mean?
to,
What do you mean by fundamental bootcamp? I'm curious.
I don't know. Somebody mentioned that in the chat. Maybe just bootcamp on fundamentals. A lot of the bootcamps now focus on frameworks, I think, like React and stuff like that.
That's interesting. I think most of the focus on frameworks. Yeah, James, I can you elaborate what you mean by a fundamentals bootcamp?
Yeah, so I just finished Flatirons and it was very focused on React, JavaScript, and mainly React, even more so than JavaScript, and then Rails as a backend. And the takeaway has been not to put down Flatiron. There was a lot that was positive, but I think the focus was just to teach us how to get things on the page is kind of the catch-all. And I'm now in a process of going back and just trying to get the fundamentals down. And it's not because they failed in teaching it to me, they just kind of didn't.
Right.
In many ways, or it was just breezed over in such a short manner because we had to keep moving. So that's what I was getting at when I was saying someone should invent the fundamentals bootcamp, because at least my current experience, it didn't have much.
Yeah, I guess I like fundamental hyperskill. God, fundamentals can mean so many different things. Like, are you referring to specifically like vanilla JavaScript, or I don't know?
Well, I went to your Webpack and I thought it was really interesting, and I had some understanding of what was going on. But recently I've been trying to do a refactor on my last project, a Mod 5 project, and it's not working with an API necessarily, or some of the issues in the refactor are working with an API, but it's really getting down to like HTTP requests actually, and headers and certain things that need to be part of the build process with deployment. And none of that was even mentioned in the entirety of our bootcamp. And so thankfully I have a brother who's a software developer and has been for many years, and he's sort of bringing me back to the basics. And when I'm talking with other people in my cohort, they're sort of wide-eyed looking at me in the camera like, what is he telling you about? And I'm like, I don't even know, it's new stuff. I don't like, because none of us have a clue what it is,
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Like, I very, very much still believe that a bootcamp education is a worthwhile thing. It is not the same. It is not the same ticket that it was 3 to 4 years ago, or 5 even, or 6. And I am thinking about, like, I think it's an interesting idea to have, or it's an interesting observation. What you're saying is that you're lacking this exposure to underlying technologies. But of course, like, you could, how deep do you want to go on fundamentals? Eventually you're reverse engineering a CS degree, right? I mean, for the time that you put into a bootcamp education, it's actually more expensive than a CS degree, right? Like, you're going to spend more money per month on a bootcamp. So as you like add more and more and more time, like you might as well go back to school.
Well, and I'll stop, and then obviously you should keep going. But I think because
No,
what I'm
no.
in I think a lot of people who are in this group right now they're in the process of looking for a job,
Right.
and we need to. It's this whole thing, this process of you need to have experience. It's like, well, you need to hire us as a junior developer so we can get experience. And while I can talk about React and whatever functional components, class components, and all, new trendier workflows within them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If it came down to anything dealing with I think basic HTTP requests and sort of unfolding any of those, troubleshooting any of that, I don't have really any experience. And that is difficult, or it's kind of hard to wrap my head around, because I know I'll never be in the perfect place to be hired. It's going to be a learning process, but I feel like, again, like my time is best served when I'm not just applying for jobs, doing some data structure algorithm, is not to try and learn TypeScript and learn Golang and learn all these other languages, but to try and do the fundamentals, and maybe not recreate a computer science degree, but to just get some of those, I think, basics under my belt.
Yeah, one thing I would suggest, you can take one-off courses, because even though I've been a software developer for 7 years, I still constantly take courses. And even community college is free in a lot of places now. I don't know if it's free everywhere, but SF, it's free, and the classes are online, so you can take like a networking class. I've taken 3 classes at Bradfield School of Computer Science after I've graduated Dev Bootcamp. I'll drop the link. And they had like a networking, they had like an APIs class, and like it was, you browse packets, so you really learn at the lower level, like how the information is being transmitted. So it's helpful to like learn stuff like that. So just the boot camps are really short. It's just fact. Most of them nowadays, I think, do the top-down approach. So you learn a framework, just so like you say, you get stuff on the screen that gets you excited, right? And then when you run into problems and stuff, then you have to dig deeper to like figure out how the stuff is working, which I think is pretty good. I think the bottom-up approach, where you learn the fundamentals first and then start building stuff, you might lose interest in the beginning because you don't see something on the screen, right? So there's trade-offs to like the different ways that you can teach somebody how to just be a developer.
Or if you don't lose interest, it can be hard to conceptualize, like, what is it I'm actually doing? That was my struggle the whole time until we got something on the screen.
Like if you hang out on Twitter, it's been a debate for a long time, like what's better way to do, like teach from top down or bottom up.
I think that debate is
both.
Fundamentally flawed. I think it depends on the person.
Yeah,
it depends on the person. It depends on what you're going to do.
That's why the answer is always it depends.
Yeah. But I think, to sort of get to practical solutions and advice, which I try to sort of always be ruthlessly pragmatic. When you are working in a high level framework, or really anything, one of the very best ways to learn and get better at it is to try and explain it. Like, I can't tell you how much I became a much better software engineer when I was teaching. Like, I grew more as a software engineer in the 2 years that I was teaching at Full Stack than probably the 2 years prior, when I was doing mostly managerial stuff. And so if you are working in a high level framework and you reach a point where you're like, this just kind of works, but I don't really know, like, try and articulate it, explain it to someone or to a rubber duck on your desk. Like, explain what's going on, and it will so quickly become clear to you what specific things you don't understand and where to go look to go deeper rather than broad. Yeah,
definitely. If you're in a boot camp now, or if you recently graduated and they offer people to become TAs or mentors. I highly recommend that. I did that.
Yeah.
I mentored at that bootcamp for 2 years, and then I have to like explain all the stuff we learned in the bootcamp to the new people, right? And it is like super helpful to like sit there and try to like think how you're gonna explain these like topics to people. And then people just come up with questions that you never thought about. You're just like, oh, I don't know how that thing works. I'll get
So
back
you
to
flag
you.
an instructor, right?
I'll get back to you on that. Or like you sit there and you both learn it together.
Yeah.
That's what I did a lot of times. But,
Awesome.
Yeah. Should we get into the questions?
Yeah, I guess we can get started now.
That was a good discussion though.
Absolutely.
I didn't realize we hadn't started.
That was an informal question I just saw like in the Zoom chat. It wasn't from the Slido.
Yeah. All right, but these are from the Slido now. So this first one is a very broad one. Any suggestions for a self-taught dev to land the first job as a developer?
Oof. Take everything that I have to say with some grain of salt, because I am speaking as someone who has not, like, I landed my first job as a developer 10 years ago. And I am mostly, by the time I'm interviewing someone now, they have been through several levels of gatekeeping before I'm talking to them. So I'm going to give you my take on usually what impresses me from the time I am interviewing with someone. But actually getting to that interview is like a whole different beast. And actually I have some opinions on that too. So yeah, we'll go into all of it, I guess. The first thing I would say is, especially if you, I don't know if you are like purely self-taught or came from a boot camp. I consider coming from a boot camp still a flavor of self-taught, but understand that I sort of alluded to it earlier, like a boot camp education is not a credential. It is a sign that you have put some effort into your own self-learning, but it's not a thing that you can really lean on, especially now. It is more and more, and like more of them are popping up. More and more bootcamp educated engineers are coming out looking for the same number of jobs. And so it is like, if I'm just being hard and real about it, like it is I've compared it to a group of people trying to get up an escalator. There's only so much space. You're getting in there. Like, some of it is just where you end up in the group, and when you get to the front of the line and end up at the escalator, that'll get you to the top. And once you're up there, there's plenty of room for you, but there's only so much like intake capacity. And so it gets harder and harder and harder to stand out. I don't envy anyone trying to just reply cold to an email right now, or to a job posting right now, especially because so many of them are processed by bots. Like there's a robot reading your resume, matching on search terms. And if you don't match that in the bigger companies, and probably even in some of the smaller companies, if you don't match that, a human doesn't even see your resume. For that reason, the very best thing you can do, you've heard it, you hate it, is to network. There is a woman that I used to work with at Full Stack who runs her own coaching firm for people transitioning into tech. Her name is Meg Duffy. I think it's Megan with an H -Duffy.com. She has amazing advice for building trust and building networking. And what she calls it is building relationships. Like, forget the term networking. You're building relationships. You are building genuine human connections, people who trust you, who will think of you, and who you will think of them. You're building trust. Like, that is the number one thing that everyone hires for, implicitly or explicitly, is, do they trust you to do the job that they are going to give you. So Megan Duffy, Megan with an H, M-E-G-H. Yeah, there it is. So you know, like I will tell you that I have gotten pretty much every job I've ever had has been through someone I know. And the one that I did go through a recruiter, I didn't last 5 months because it was just like, you are the commodity to the recruiter. You are the product. And so it can be, if a recruiter works for you to get your first job in tech, great, do it. But remember that you're not paying for it, you're the product. They are trying to fill jobs and get their commission. There are plenty of recruiters who are ethical and fine to work with, but you're the product. Often, and also many recruiters won't work with juniors because they take a commission, so the starting salary doesn't make sense for them. It's not economically feasible. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. I've gotten a little off topic, but trust, where I was going with this is like, the best thing you can do is, you know, just keep talking to people, keep finding anyone you know in the industry. You know, plenty of people I talk to are like, yeah, my brother's a software developer, my cousin's a software developer. Like, talk to them, like work those connections, have them help you. Like, even if they're not actively connecting you to people who are hiring, have them look at the code you write, have them you know, talk to you about the work you're doing, talk to you about everything that you have like learned and understand. And like, the more you can talk to engineers who are farther in their career than you are, the more you will be pushed out of your comfort zone. That's a thing that I didn't do early enough in my career, is like expose the work that I was doing, let other people see the code that I was doing, and talk to them about the choices I was making. And like, as soon as I did that and got over my fear of being looked at as like, I don't know, I don't know, I'm not very good. People would tell me things that were useful, and I made me a better engineer. And the act of talking to those people made them trust me and made them reach out and go to bat for me and recommend me when their jobs came up. Like, yeah, just like keep networking, keep talking to people. Replying cold to a job posting is really, really a hard way to go. And then as far as like skipping over the I've applied and now I've gotten to the interview stage. Speaking personally, when I'm interviewing someone, the thing that impresses me, and this will not surprise you based on probably what I've said already, is like, I'm not impressed by a million frameworks. I'm not impressed that you've worked with a million different things. You've touched React and Angular and Vue. I'm impressed if we can discuss in depth the things that you have worked on. What have you observed working on your side projects? What challenges have you come up with? Did you address? What did you not understand? Like, if people don't put enough value on being able to articulate the things that they don't understand. If you can clearly articulate what you don't understand, that's like, you're more than halfway to figuring out what it is. So in an interview, if I'm interviewing you and we come up on something that you're stumped on, and you say, I don't know what's going on here because X, Y, and Z. Here's what I've observed. Here's what I think should be happening, but I don't see that. And so this is what's weird to me. If you can really clearly articulate those sorts of things, yeah, you're having a conversation with a colleague at that point, and that right there again builds trust. Yeah, I don't know. That's some advice. Is that helpful?
Awesome. Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to get to that point. And I find myself frequently just kind of listing off the things. Okay, I understand this, but this is the part. And it's hard to articulate that.
Yeah. Are any of you on Chris Ferdinandi's email list? Do you know of Chris Ferdinandi? Chris Ferdinandi he's does a daily email on vanilla JavaScript. set his stake in the ground about frameworks are unnecessary in 90% of the cases that we use them, and we should be using vanilla JavaScript more. And it's a fairly controversial statement, and we don't have to discuss it, but he does a daily email on using vanilla JavaScript. His daily email is great for learning the API and learning the things you can do with vanilla JavaScript. I continue to learn things by just reading his email list. His website is gomakethings.com. But yeah, there you go. But he has put together, and I don't have a specific link to it yet. He has put together a guide on getting a human to see your resume. It might not be quite by that name, but like before he was a software engineer, he was in HR. And so he's got a whole page on like, here's what you should think about when you are applying cold or when you are out applying for jobs. So I'd go, Chris Ford and Andy, yeah. I would go search for that. I don't have a specific link for you. There it is, career guide. I'll also plug my own podcast. He was on episode 3 of our podcast.
And did you say how people can find your podcast? Is it on...
Yeah, it's called Exceptions Welcome. You'll find it in wherever you get podcasts, but
great.
Exceptions Welcome.
All right. I think we can move on to the next one here. How do you approach breaking down and tackling a large project, such as an open source project?
Oof. It depends on what I'm doing. If I'm trying to come into a large project and be productive that already exists, that's going to be a different process than how do I conceive of a large project that I'm starting from the ground up. Which would you like me to start with? I'm happy to talk about either one.
I think it'd be great to hear about jumping into a large project.
Sure. I think that the very best thing you can do with a large project is remember that humans built this. Humans built this over time. Nothing is ideal. Even if it was built by the most talented engineers you've ever encountered, time causes all code to decay, and market forces cause you to ship code before you think that it's perfect. So you're going to come in and you're going to find things that look weird, and this is one of the biggest things that I hear. I hear it very frequently from bootcamp grads who get their first job and land in their first living code base, and they go, "Oh my God, all the things that you taught me, nobody does any of them." It's like, well, yeah, because sometimes you just got to ship, right? And because not everyone was my student. I give you my opinions, but plenty of other people have other opinions. You know, everybody does things differently. So so that's part of the reason that I think so many bootcamp grads struggle, is because they are familiar with a very particular set of tools and a very particular way of doing things. And so to start trying to understand what are the ways that things have been put together, what are the processes in place here. And so the first thing that I want to do anytime I land in a new code base is I want to talk to the people who are working on it every day. I want someone to walk me through not the code, but the application. Show me the application, show me, like, sit me down and show me what it does. Don't look at any of the code yet. Show me what it does. Tell me about the problems that it solves. Then start talking to me about the conceptual domain. Like, what are the moving pieces in this code conceptually? Are there users and projects? Like, what are the nouns and the verbs? What do people do to things in this application? Start talking to me about that. And then start telling me about your perception of how it is put together. Like, tell me about, and what you're going to find oftentimes when you're working on a big project, especially if there's a large team, is you're going to get the 5 blind people are touching an elephant, right? This, oh, well, the code over here is like rough and scratchy, and the code over here feels like a snake, and like so you have to like start building your own picture of it. And it, again, it's going to depend on what you're being tasked with doing. Like, I'm at a point in my career where oftentimes I have to drop into, like, when I start a new project, especially when I was consulting, like, I had to get a high level view of everything that was going on and what are the business stakes of everything that's happening and what is valuable and important and what is not. I had to get that very quickly. If you're coming into a code base new on a job, you are probably going to be handed this part of this application. You're going to kind of live in here for a while, and you need to learn, well, how are these requests made? How do you know, what is the library that handles HTTP requests? What is the paradigm that we use for asynchronous code? Are we using RxJS? Are we using, I don't know, something else? That's RxJS is front on my mind right now because of work. State management, like, what you're going to be worrying about, like, what are the more like nitty gritty things that are going to make you productive when you take like your first ticket. Then I'm going to say, like, before, nothing teaches like trying to get something done. So even if no one is going to trust you yet with, like, I'm assuming you're like, you've landed in your first job. But this may be, but adapt this to whatever situation you want to, but like, say that you're new in the job and no one's going to give you a ticket to close yet, but you want to get to know how this works. Like, just check out a new branch on your own and try and do something. Just like start, like, how would I make a new page in this application? Real quick, you're going to figure out what you need to learn and understand. And then, okay, I've got that page. Okay, now where would the templates live for that? And like, just try and do something, anything, and take it back to someone else when you have questions, or then, at that point, start digging into the code and trying to understand. It's gonna be an interesting balance, because, if you're familiar with the stack that you're working in, you can probably lean a little more on documentation. And like, you should be reading code and reading documentation to find your bearings. But as you, like especially, just don't be afraid to ask people who know. I think that's my biggest piece of advice for you. Like, people, yeah, don't be afraid to ask. But I don't know, did that answer the question?
Yeah, it gave a lot of great tips. For that suggestion, don't be afraid to ask people. Would you say try to, like, do you ask them in a PR, on a PR that exists, or just ask other engineers that that maybe aren't familiar with the project?
Well, I think it all depends, again, on what you're trying to do. Like, if you're just sitting there trying to understand the code, if you haven't been tasked with anything specific, just ask. Just like, tap someone on the shoulder virtually, because we don't tap people on the shoulders right now. But yeah, probably not in a PR, because a PR is generally going to assume that you've already, like, you've gotten to a point where you think this is ready to ship. I think that the more you can, PR is pull request. It is when so you check out a branch on your code and you're ready for it to be reviewed and merged back into main. Yeah, it is specifically a GitHub term, but it is used pretty interchangeably on any kind of Git workflow or any kind of source control workflow. Yeah, I don't know. I'm much more of a fan of just like casual conversation, or like pair programming, honestly, is great. If you can get someone on your team to pair with you, to just sit down with you for an hour or two and like help you navigate the code together, that's also a great one.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And you can just ask somebody to like do a walkthrough of the code base with you. And so whatever communication tools the project is using, whether it's Slack, Discord, or however, Telegram, however people are communicating, you can just find somebody to see if they can like spend 30 minutes with you to like walk you through the code base and explain like decisions that were made and stuff. Because like you're gonna see stuff and be like,
Yeah.
Why did they do it like this? And that happens all the time. And it's because you don't know the story of like what happened while the code base is building, and then it can help just having somebody walk through you and explain like why decisions were made and stuff like that, and just how things work.
Great. Okay, moving on to this next one. What is the process for pursuing a first job in tech focused on DevOps rather than like over junior software engineer? So if someone is curious, if someone is interested in moving towards DevOps first, would that process be different?
I think it's an interesting question. If you have a degree, if you have a bootcamp education in full stack development, I think that DevOps is going to be it would be an odd first job. But that said, I think that I'll actually just level with you. I have only recently moved into DevOps. My job title is DevOps engineer. Up until October, I would have called myself a full stack developer. But like I said, I am one who likes to be dropped into stuff and figure out what's going on. So when when I came in and was told like, we need a DevOps engineer, you want it? I was like, sure. Yeah, trial by fire, exactly. So that's where I am. I would say like the most important things that if you're going to take your full stack engineering education or take that as a starting point, the things that you should understand specifically about DevOps, there's a few that I would say. Understand the notion of statelessness, of being able to build stateless applications, and by that I mean backend APIs that do not that you can scale horizontally. So what this means is, if you're they say that if you can take a problem and throw more of the same thing at it, you're building it correctly. And I'm struggling to like actually clarify this well. So a stateless API doesn't require sessions, I guess, is actually the best way to describe this. A stateless API says that, or it doesn't require the session to be on board as part of the say Node or Python application that you're building, or Rails application that you're building. Your session could be stored in a a Redis or Memcache or some other data store, usually a key value store. The idea being that the best that you want to decouple all of the structural elements of your application. So your the application that is serving, say, your API endpoints, if you're going to scale up, you want to just be able to add more instances of that application behind a load balancer. So there will be one machine that receives thousands of requests, and it will just forward all those requests to multiple versions of your application. And so if multiple versions of your application, if your application requires a session, this is all drastically simplified, but if your application requires a session, then you have to have subsequent requests from the same client routed to the same instance of your application, which becomes a trickier problem to solve. So if you can instead have a session ID that is sent from your client, and you're storing your sessions somewhere else, then your application is truly stateless. It can be scaled better. And that is like understanding that notion of statelessness, like that's a very specific example of statelessness, but it underpins the way that modern cloud architecture is put together, is that you have many different small applications running and communicating with each other, and the more state that they have to transmit to each other, the harder it is to keep them separate, the harder it is to scale them separately. So I feel like I went sort of sideways on that question, but is that helpful?
I think basically a lot of that stuff you learn with experience, so that's why it's kind of like hard if you want to just your first job to be like DevOps, unless you've been tinkering for a long time with stuff. I don't know many people who do DevOps as their first thing. They kind of just end up doing it because the company needed somebody to do that.
Yeah.
And then they transition into it.
Is anyone aware of like a DevOps bootcamp? Because it is a growing need. I mean,
I think it's because mostly you learn from experience, right? It's like hard to learn.
Yeah, but I would have said the same thing about web development.
That's another thing for me though, that until I'm in it and see the different parts and like the problems like right in front of my face, it's hard to conceptualize what is this problem I'm trying to solve.
Yeah.
But
I would say that the thing that is most valuable, like I said, as a full stack engineer, is the same thing that is true of just generally building software in general, is the more you can keep your components decoupled from each other, the better.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on then. How do you make a good impression at your first dev job?
So you've gotten the job and it's day one of, interesting. How do you make a good first impression? I would say, ironically, don't be too worried about making a first impression. Like, take a breath and relax. Like, you've been hired. You like somebody sees potential in you. You're good. But especially as you. So I give a piece of advice that I used to give this to my students for interviewing, but I think it holds here as well, which is like, think of the things that you know in 3 concentric rings, and in the middle you have the things that you know them down pat. The next ring out is the things you kind of know, or like you've maybe done a little toy project with them, or like you've read a lot about them but not really used them. And then like the outer ring is like the things you just don't know. And the best thing that you can do is to just really have a good understanding of where something falls in those 3 rings. And so if you come across a problem or are talking with someone about some code or whatever, like if you're talking about something that you know, own it, know it, don't waffle about it, just like be confident in yourself and have that conversation with your colleague, right? If you're in the middle ring, the stuff that you like kind of know, you've had some exposure to, like, be honest about that. Say like, oh, I've never worked with that. Here's what I have done. How does it differ? Like I would have expected, like I would have solved this problem with these tools this way, but you're telling me we use this, and like, how does that work? How would I relate that to what I already know? And again, like the more you can be aware of your own limitations, but not in a way that you're like self-deprecating. Just be like, take one step back and say, like, when I hire a junior, I don't expect them to know very much. I expect them to show a lot of potential. Like when I hire someone, it is because I see that they are someone who can learn things. And so the best way that you can probably make a good impression would be not to show how much you know, but to show how you're able to recognize what you need to learn and go and seek out that knowledge. Because the sort of, I guess the like flip side or the negative side of that is like, I'm hiring, if I were to state it negatively, I would say like, I'm hiring someone that I don't think is going to make my job harder. I'm hiring someone who, when they get into trouble, they're not going to dig themselves a hole that I then have to dig them out of. So yeah, that would be, I would say the way to make a good impression is like a positive attitude. I probably should have said that first. A positive attitude and just being aware of what you know and showing an ability to acquire new knowledge.
That's great.
I'd also add maybe like taking initiative to like set up one-on-one meetings with other teammates and stuff.
Yeah.
If that's not already included in the onboarding process, because then you get to know everybody at the company and then figure out who you're more comfortable asking questions to. So it also benefits you, but it also looks good to other people, I think, that you just took the initiative to just go and do that by yourself.
And like, don't get too hung up on trying to be productive in the very first, months that you're there. Like, if the company is even remotely functional, if you're falling short of expectations, they'll tell you. What you really want to make sure you're doing is learning about the ecosystem you've been dropped into and learning about the problems they're facing and starting to form ideas and opinions about how they can be solved.
Yeah. Also learning about the company, understanding the business.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, going back to that, sitting down with someone and understanding how someone interacts with the app and what the different functionalities are. Absolutely. Okay, this one then. What ways can we expose ourselves to different software development processes or styles?
I would say I am conflicted about how much you should be exposing yourself to different processes and styles. I would say let's set sort of that expectation first, which is that it is certainly worthwhile to learn about different styles and understanding the like what different terms mean, to be able to compare to what you know. But until you have a solid foundation, a solid understanding, until you would call yourself competent with like the styles and tools that you already know, don't go learning, like deep lambda calculus functional programming if you've been taught to build REST APIs, right? That's actually not a very good comparison. But I would say, assuming that you already have a pretty good, understanding, a pretty good foundation in what you are doing. Honestly, I just like read stuff. Like read blogs, listen to podcasts. You'll start to hear terms that you'll start to hear terms a lot. And when you hear a term 3 or 4 times, go look it up. Yeah, RxJS, good example. watching the chat go by. I don't think I have better advice than that. Is like, just kind of the more you can expose yourself to what other people are saying, what other people are doing, and hearing what terms they're using, you'll start to hear certain terms again and again and again. And then it's like, oh yeah, if I've heard that the 3rd or the 4th time, maybe I should start making a little sense of that and understanding where does that fit kind of in the ecosystem that I know, to be able to, at least to discuss it intelligently, even if you wouldn't be productive with it to try and build something.
And also you can, once you get into the industry, you can just switch jobs every couple of years.
Yeah, that works too.
That's how I did it. So I got exposed to different teams. Every team does different companies. Besides teams, every company has different culture. Every team does things differently. And then you just, by your experience, you learn all these different ways and you see what works and what doesn't work. So that's one reason why I think a lot of people, especially in the Bay Area, it's common to switch jobs every couple of years. For one thing, that's how you make your salary go up faster. And
Yeah.
the other benefit is you get better as an engineer, I think, just because you get exposed to like all these different ways of doing things. And then you can, because you can see what works and what doesn't work, as you keep switching, you build up all these things in your brain of like how to do things more efficiently.
Yeah, hearing the suggestion to read a lot, reading other people's code is so helpful for me. They'll figure out some way to solve a problem that would have taken me a lot longer, but then it's just the answer's right there, and then I don't remember it next time.
That's why watching like Twitch and YouTube of other people's coding is really helpful too, because then you're just like, whoa, I never thought of doing it like that before.
Yeah, totally.
All right, then. This next one, coming from zero experience in the industry and being self-taught, should I apply for a job that's entry level, but requires 2 years or more, 2+ years of experience?
Yeah. What do you have to lose? Yeah, apply for that job. Do it. I mean, I'm assuming it's a software job.
Yep.
No, I mean, you've probably seen people posting the ridiculous things that people put up as requirements. They're like, need 6 years experience in this library that's only been around for 2. And it's like, those years of experience requirements are crap. Like most of the time they're written by an HR manager who has played, 3 rounds of telephone with, maybe if you're lucky, they've played 3 rounds of telephone with someone in the engineering department, or they're just making it up. Like, apply. It's fine.
Or they just copied and pasted from like some other company or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Next one then, how do you determine where bootcamp grads are? I'm assuming like skills wise. Are there large differences between different programs? And if so, how do you account for that?
Are you referring to how do I determine this in my training materials, or how do I determine this when I'm interviewing someone for a job? If
Ryan,
you're here,
if you'd
just
like
drop
to
it in the
answer,
chat.
go ahead. In
the training materials.
Cool.
I am honestly, I am mostly working from where from the things that I have observed from my time teaching. So in some ways it's very, I'm not gonna say biased, but it is, as a starting point, it comes out of I'm assuming the knowledge and the abilities of folks coming out of the program where I used to teach, which has served pretty well. People seem to mostly respond like, I make myself very available in my webinars. I try to be fairly conversational and try and make sure that I'm not leaving anyone behind, and try and I do a lot of sort of level setting while I'm teaching or while I'm lecturing, to sort of like make sure like everyone understand what I'm doing here. Am I leaving anyone behind here? And honestly, I invite people on my mailing list all the time to just reply to my emails with questions. And like, I get a couple a week. People reply and say like, I didn't quite get this, or this was great, or, I just really try and keep as much open dialogue as I can with the people I'm lecturing and emailing to. And that has seemed to work out okay. I don't know, how am I doing so far? Am I talking over or under where you are? So
feel free to say.
I'm doing great. All right, thanks. Glad to hear it.
I saw some thumbs up in the video. I have the grid view on my Zoom.
Okay, this next one is, when I see code that is styled or organized differently from what I normally do, is it better for me to try and mimic the code or improve, refactor it first?
Ooh, there's a lot to unpack in that question. That's a good one. The term improve is making a lot of assumptions. It doesn't, when you look at it, improving, there's a difference between, has this done badly or is this done differently than I learned? They're not the same thing. And I'm a very, like, specifically, if we're talking JavaScript, I'm a big fan of Prettier as a tool. If any of you are familiar with it, we'll see a lot of nodding. For anyone who's not, it is a tool that just reformats your code as you type, every time you save, it just formats it. And it says, this is not your decision to make. All of us working in this repository are adhering to these styles, and, go shove it if you disagree. Or try and fight me, but every time you save, your editor is going to reformat your code. So honestly, I think that what is most important is consistency. The more that, Airbnb is a good style guide. The more that you can be consistent among your teammates so that you avoid unnecessary cognitive load, the better. If you come across, I was working in a team one time where everyone had their own way of doing things, and everyone was resistant to setting up linting rules. And this was a long time ago. This was before this was like best practice. But like, people would just go and reformat each other's code, and it makes for just the noisiest PRs. It makes for, like, you're just seeing all of these just like strange formatting changes when you're trying to review someone's code, and you're just like, why are we doing this? And I actually went to but like, I was a lot younger then, and I went to one of my coworkers who was, we were both kind of leading teams, and I was like, Sean, I think we should settle on a style guide. He's like, ooh, controversial. Okay, where would we start? I was like, well, I don't know. Let's start with 2 spaces. He's like, 2 spaces? I use 4. I was like, this is insane. This will never work. Like, that was the end of it. We never discussed it again. We've since moved on, and I'd let Prettier make those decisions for me. But yeah, like, consistency is way more important than just like specific formatting choices. Architectural choices start to be that's where you start to get a little more like, oh, there is maybe specific good and bad decisions to be made here. There are very few right decisions. There are a lot of wrong decisions. So if you can't look at something and say, this is wrong because, leave it how it is. If you look at it and say, this is not how I would have done it, leave it how it is. But yeah, if you look at it and you're like, I can say for this specific reason, this is, I don't know, exponentially complex, or this is, I don't know, a security hole for some reason. Like, if you can point to a reason, then like, yeah, by all means fix it. But just because it's your own preference, no.
You should also discuss it with the team too, if you're gonna change
well, yes,
it.
Say that, yeah.
also that,
because even if we found a reason why it's not good, they might have had a good reason.
Yeah. Sorry,
their reason might be better than the trade-off.
Yeah, I said change. I didn't mean like go and just like change it. I meant like bring it to your team as like, hey, here's a thing I saw.
Yeah, you never know if maybe there wasn't a good reason for it, and then that reason has been replicated in a bunch of other spots. Like, yeah, talking to the team is great.
Yeah. Generally, you want to try, and if they already developed conventions the way they're doing it, you want to stick to that unless you find like a really good reason why they should switch it. But yeah, it's always good to discuss conventions with whatever team you're working with.
Yeah.
When I first joined the team that I'm currently working on, I was pairing with one engineer, and we were editing some CSS file, and they're like, actually, let's rearrange these because we want them to be in alphabetical order. And then like a day later, I was pairing with a different one, and they're like, actually, let's rearrange this file because we like it to be of importance based on, like, I don't remember what the rule was, but it was such a like light bulb moment for me. So next team meeting, I had a little section where I wanted to talk it over with the group because I recognized like we're all undoing each other's work here. Let's figure out our rule. And then there was a linter to fix it all.
I was going to say your linter can do that. Like your linter will alphabetize your imports, like
Yeah.
all of that stuff. Leave it to your linter and prettier. Like
yeah. All right. Next one here then. What are the trustworthy sources that can provide remote opportunities for people looking for a first dev job, regardless of the applicant's location?
No idea. Sorry, I actually cannot responsibly answer that question. I really don't know. Sorry.
All righty.
I'm sorry, can you all hear my kids in the background here? If it sounds like
it's really soft.
Okay.
you can't really hear it that much. Yeah,
Great.
but luckily more and more jobs are putting remote in the job title, so maybe eventually all the jobs will offer remote.
Yeah.
We'll see. But yeah, I usually hear about them just on Twitter.
I found this site remotive.io. I think some of them are really specific about which country, but some will specify like global, worldwide. That's one resource. I haven't
you might be able to filter too
jobs
on like AngelList and stuff. I don't know. I haven't used AngelList in a while, but I know a lot of guests we've had on here who suggest AngelList for like your first job.
Okay, I'll move on to the next one. How do you handle a technical interview question when you have no idea what the solution is?
That's a great question, and that is the genesis of my 3 circles comparison from earlier, which is like you might be asked a question that you just have no idea, and the more that you can always be bringing the conversation back to the things that you know. So if someone says like, how would you do this with MongoDB? And you're like, oh, I don't know MongoDB. I've only ever used Postgres. How are they different? And this person might tell you, oh, well, Mongo is a document store, or not, Mongo uses the document model rather than a normalized table model. And you might say, oh, interesting. So how would you do joins? How does that different? Like now you're having a conversation with a colleague, and that person, like with few exceptions, the person doing an interview wants you to succeed, or at least doesn't want to be wasting their own time. They want to be having an interesting conversation with you. So again, the more you can say like, you might get lucky and they might say, oh yeah, that's fine, just use Postgres. Or you can at least show that you are competent and aware of the things that you know and can solve problems in the paradigms you're familiar. Or that you can, again, identify the things that you don't, and that you might say, well, like, okay, here, so now I would go and read up on whatever, I don't know. But yeah, sometimes you just don't know. And sometimes interview. I had an interview one time where it wasn't going great. And this was like sort of in like 2013. But like I think at the end they were just like trying to lob me an easy one. And they just said, so like, how would you, if you just were gonna like start a new project, how would you start? And I froze. I had no answer to that question. I said, I don't know. Like, needless to say, I did not get that job. But yeah, it Zen mode in VS Code. There you go. Yeah, sometimes you bomb an interview, and you can't get too down on yourself about it. Use it as a learning experience, and go on to the next one.
Yeah, it's good to try and break it down into smaller problems and then talk about the parts that you know how to solve.
Yeah.
Then a lot of times the interviewer will be like, okay, that makes sense, and they might give you hints about like how to solve the rest of it. So.
Right.
Cool. You mentioned that one of the qualities you look for is the ability to learn. How does one maximize learning after transitioning from boot camp to first job?
Well, okay. Maximize learning. I mean, to some degree, your job will teach you. Like there's almost no way not to learn on your first job. You're going to be you will sink or swim in your first job. You're going to be surrounded by a lot of things that you didn't know existed. So to maximize learning, I would say, again, I would get back to the idea that articulating what you don't know is a really, really useful fundamental skill for acquiring new knowledge. If you don't know what it is that you're trying to learn, you won't learn it. And when I say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous to say it, but how many times do you sit down and you're like, oh, I guess I'll do this tutorial for Angular. Now I know Angular? Do I know Angular now? I don't know. Could I start a new project in this? Could I be dropped into a full-on project that's, you know, like a product that has existed for 8 years and has 8 years of history? Could I like sit down and be productive in there because I did this one course on Angular? Not if you can't articulate what's different between what you know and what you are looking at. And I would say one of the best ways to do that, honestly, is writing. Like, even if no one ever reads what you write, having to organize your thoughts and having to write about them so quickly exposes to you. It's the same as explaining to someone. Like, it just so quickly exposes what you lack, what context or details you were taking for granted when you try and articulate it. Because when you have to take the like fuzzy nonverbal mental model that you have and commit it to words, the details suddenly become very, very clear, or the lack of details become very clear.
Our team does a lot of drawing things, and we use a program called Lucid Chart. So even if it seemed like some things are probably easier to write out with words, and some things might be easier to draw and be able to understand, you know, exactly what's going on that way. I also, with learning, I just discovered this Andrew Huberman. He apparently works with, I think, Carol Dweck. And so he does a lot. He's a neuroscientist, like, yeah, I think a neuroscientist, but he's got a couple of episodes on learning and how to learn better, which I thought were really interesting too. But really, what?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, for those who don't know, Carol Dweck is the one that wrote the book Mindset, which is on growth mindset.
But yeah, identifying what you need to learn is by far the more important part before optimizing how to learn fast.
Yeah. Also, I would just add to reducing distractions. helps you learn. Just make it harder to do stuff that are distractions. Like I've told people many times, if you tend to binge watch Netflix, cancel your subscription while you're like trying to like learn something. Then it's harder for you to watch Netflix, right? You don't have an account.
I like, never mind.
All right, then. Next question. We've got like 7 minutes. Okay. What does a typical pair programming session look like? Is it just two people trying to program the same thing, or matching a junior and a senior developer together?
So I don't think there is a typical pair programming session. A lot of it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Also, Brady, I'll tell you, like, I don't have like a hard 3:30 exit, so I can stay a little after if we've got some more questions. So there's sort of a like canonical format that you'll hear about, which is driver navigator, which says that one person is writing the code, the other person is sketching out high level ideas, watching for syntax errors, sort of keeping an eye on things, giving giving feedback, and you switch those roles periodically. That is, so when we were teaching at Full Stack, that is the model that we used as much as we could. That works really well for two engineers who are of roughly the same experience level, and it works really well for two engineers who especially have like sort of overlapping but not the same skill set. They can inform each other, and it's a very, very effective learning model, or learning method. Frequently in my job, I'm pairing with more junior engineers, and oftentimes that ends up as maybe less of a concrete driver navigator role and more of a well, it can sometimes become less structured or more, I would say, like less formally structured, more kind of like in the moment, what are we trying to accomplish? One of us is one of us is driving, one of us is navigating, especially remotely, but it can, if you have two distinctly different levels of experience, a lot of times it can become more instructive, or it can be I don't know, less formulaic, I guess. VS Code Live Share, I don't use VS Code, but everyone that I talk to says that Live Share is amazing and allows two people to do sort of a Google Docs style like collaborative working model, which is there are a couple of engineers at Screencastify who are kind of pioneering this as a model, as like, this is maybe how we want to do things more formally as a team, that and kind of showing some of the things that are possible, like you work on the controller while I work on the model, you work on the styling while I work on the form, like let's make sure we're talking clearly about what the interface is between the two things that we're building, but we can work together and ask questions and be in two different parts of the code. So that can be a model that works too. Like I don't, the driver navigator role is often what people are referring to when they say pair programming, but in practice, it often meanders from that model.
Yeah, I worked at Pivotal for a while, and we did 100% pair programming.
Yeah, how was that? I didn't know you worked at Pivotal.
It's exhausting, actually.
Yeah, I find it so tiring.
I thought I wanted to try it because I knew Pivotal's famous for that, right? Like,
yeah.
So when the recruiter hit me up, I was like, it's time to try something new. I'll go work at Pivotal. I've always been interested in their the way they do programming, because that's what we learned at Dev Bootcamp, right? Pair programming. So I did it, and it's so exhausting because you have to communicate everything you're thinking all day long. And it's really rigid structure. Like you had to come in at 9, and it was a traditional 9 to 5, because once you get your first jobs in the industry, you'll notice a lot of companies is like, whatever, just come when you wake up, and as long as you come to stand up or whatever, if you have stand up, then leave whenever. It's like really flexible. At least in the Bay Area, the culture at most companies I worked at is just get the work done. We don't care like when you come and leave. But at Pivotal, it's like, since you're pair programming, you have to be there and start at 9 and you leave at 5. You have to communicate everything, when you want to take a break, like when you're going to use the bathroom.
That sounds
you end up getting into like long arguments, like think about like doing a PR. Sometimes people will go back and forth. pair programming all day is that every day, all day.
Oh.
You trying to convince the other person like why we should do it like this. So it is good for like learning, but it's exhausting. And the way Pivotal did it is you switch pairs every day. So they don't try to like be like, let's pair this person because they have a lot of knowledge on this thing and this other person. They switch pairs every day because I think their thought is that's how they'll circulate all the knowledge in everything, by just making people switch pairs every day. I mean, you only switch within your team. I worked at Cloud Foundry, not Pivotal Labs. Pivotal Labs is a consultancy. Cloud Foundry works on the Cloud Foundry project, which is kind of like a open source Heroku. Like that's how I describe it. So I work on the Cloud Foundry side, and you have a team. Each team is like, I think like 4 to 6 engineers usually. So they just made an app where you click the button and it like randomly like pairs you, and make sure you don't pair with the person that you paired with the day before. So yeah, it totally depends. Like people have different like I worked at a small startup before, and it was just me and the CTO building stuff, and we would pair maybe like 50% of the time. And like the way we did it is we would pair to like start on some new feature that we wanted to work on, and once we like both agreed like that's the direction we wanted to go, then we would split it up and be like, okay, you did the back end, set up the database stuff, and then I'll do the front end. And then we would like split up, but like we would start pair programming just to like brainstorm ideas and just get whatever we were trying to build to get it going. So I actually learned a lot in that environment, because I was lucky because he was really awesome and involved me in everything, even when he was architecting like really complex stuff that I didn't even understand. He would always make sure to include me and like take me to the whiteboard and like,
oh man, that's huge. That's so valuable.
Yeah, so a lot of it is luck. Like I didn't know that was going to be the opportunity I had. I was the first engineer they hired, so he wasn't there when I first started. For like my first year, it was me building stuff. So once he came on board, like I was able to like get a lot better. The year that I worked with him, I think was my highest growth spurt as an engineer. So
yeah,
I just got lucky.
That I think there's a lot of value in co-ownership of features, 2 engineers owning a feature and delivering it together, even if they're not strictly pair programming. There's a lot of value in like the need for discussing your architectural ideas and your approaches when you do that, without having to articulate every single thing, every single line of code that you're writing.
I guess we can go like this one sounds like it might be a shorter one, so we can maybe do this one and then wrap it up. What do you think is the best coding podcast for someone currently working in a boot camp?
Exceptions welcome, clearly.
Done.
Nice.
All right.
Done.
Well, thank you, everybody.
I will be honest that I have fallen off in my podcast listening since I don't commute anymore. And I've fallen off in my podcast production, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, I don't know. I don't actually, I'll turn this back to you, Brady and Sam. Do you guys have good recommendations? I don't really.
I haven't been listening to like dev podcasts a lot, but when before when I did, JavaScript Jabber was probably the one I listened to the most. JavaScript Jabber, and then later on, Wes Boss started one with Steve Tolinsky, I think is his name. That one's called Syntax. And
oh yeah, that's a good one.
That one's good too. Yeah, Wes Boss is amazing. And that he's the one that made JavaScript 30 for people that aren't familiar. That's one of his free courses, but even his paid courses are really good. I bought the advanced React one. I just wanted to support him, so I like bought it. I like to support developers. I even sponsor some developers on GitHub. Yeah, but those are a couple that I really like.
I had looked this up one day a couple of years ago, probably. It was before the pandemic, so it feels like a really long time ago. But I had found, I feel like the ones that I found, the episodes are kind of like hit or miss. Sometimes I was really interested in, and sometimes I wasn't. One was Modern Web. It looks like the website was modern-web.org. And then I know I've listened to a couple Front End Happy Hour. I think those are the two I've listened to most.
I like the A16Z podcast too, just to keep up with the trends in the industry, see where things are heading. But yeah, it depends what you're interested in too. Like we named some JavaScript ones because I mostly write JavaScript, so I listen to JavaScript podcasts. But there's podcasts for everything. Just check them out and then see what you like.